Joining me now is Sourabh Guptah. He's a Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-American Studies. Thanks very much for your time there. Now, we just heard a well-rounded analysis there from our White House correspondent. Mr. Sullivan spelled out the consequences and isolation China would face if it increased support for Russia to Mr. Jaicher. China has denied a request for military support from Russia, but over the years, military ties between the two countries have expanded. Talk us through the military relationship and how it might have changed since the crisis began in Ukraine.
The military relationship has gotten increasingly tighter as the two countries have come closer geopolitically. Military relations have followed the geopolitics of Russia-China relations, and the geopolitics is that they are very close. That having been said, their militaries are by no means integrated. We have a Russian military, we have a Chinese military, and they have their own priorities. They have started doing exercises, including joint exercises. The exercises are still at an early phase. The joint exercises, the broader exercises which they have conducted have been pretty expansive in some regards. But the point I would try to point out is that the two sides are not integrated in any way militarily, even though they have a good military cooperative relationship, which they're trying to take up to the next level.
China has tried to remain neutral since this crisis began, but it was only weeks ago that Xi and Putin declared a new alliance that, quote, had no limits. What are the consequences for China in remaining tied to Putin in this way, or should Beijing give up on its neutrality and side with the West?
No, I think from a long-term perspective, from first principles-oriented perspective, the most important thing for China is to ensure that once this conflict is over, once this conflict is in the rear view, that China-Russia ties have not been significantly disrupted. That is an arduously built-up relationship, and that relationship must continue for the long run. That is priority number one. Second priority is that the U.S.-China relationship is not great, and one doesn't have to do that much for the U.S., but the China-EU relationship is an important one. It is a constructive one. So China should see what role it can play as a facilitator. And thereafter, in the context of this conflict right now, of course, at least during the hot phase, China should not be providing any military support, and it should maintain normal commercial intercourse. When I say normal commercial intercourse, means it shouldn't be backfilling for sanctions. It shouldn't be going over and above what it was normally doing, and therefore maintain the relations in oil and gas, in the grain sector, etc., etc., and thereafter see whether the U.S. and the EU have placed sanctions. After all, Chinese banks don't want to be in the crosshair of secondary sanctions, so go about that carefully. But the important point for China is to lay low and to ensure that there is not a disruption in its relations with Russia, which is a very important relationship.
But many would argue that if China outwardly condemned Russia and cut off itself from its energy, there's a strong chance it could end this war, not to mention the international praise it would gain. Why wouldn't China take that chance? What's at stake if it does?
I'll tell you what's at stake, and I'll get to the bottom line out here. At some point of time, China might be facing an armed contingency in its own theater, in the Asia-Pacific theater. At that point of time, at the very least, you do not want the Russians condemning you and certainly not backstabbing you. China does not have to support and must not support Russia for its illegal actions right now. That's absolutely clear. But what China does not need to do is go over the line and criticize Russia necessarily. What it needs to do is try to be as neutral as possible, look at the humanitarian element as best as possible. It's put out a 6-point initiative in this regard. And at this point of time, whenever possible, try to facilitate a conversation. But until either the Ukrainians or the Russians have come somewhere close to their war aims, for Ukraine, it is to expel Russia. For Russia, it is to control Ukraine's borders and its main cities. I cannot see how a conversation can really be facilitated among the sides. But in that context, as I said, China must privilege its EU relations and try to see if China and EU can facilitate a conversation using their good offices.